everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of I Never Knew But My Dog Did podcast. I am Maureen Scanlon, your hostess, or life coach Maureen, as you all know me. Today, I have such a great topic that I've never covered, surprisingly, in over 100 episodes that I've done so far. And I think it's fantastic. And when I came across my next guest, I thought it was just perfect, and that she is the perfect guest to talk about this. And excuse me, and she so graciously, and I'll say this to all my future guests, if you so graciously send me a book, because I am an avid reader, and she gifted me and sent me a book. I love to read, and I read her book cover to cover, and I loved it so much. And if you're on YouTube, I'm going to show you the cover of this book, and it is fantastic. So well written and just beautiful. So I want to introduce you my next guest. Her name is Sarah Armstrong. And Sarah, she never expected to write a book, which the topic, you'll understand why she never expected to write it. But she has a degree in marketing, and she played volleyball. So you can see she's very beautiful and very fit and athletic. And she played volleyball on a scholarship at Georgetown University. And throughout her career, she's worked in global marketing, where she's viewed as an industry leader in her area of expertise. She loves traveling the world, managing the juggling act of being a working mom, woo-woo, while raising her daughter, Grace. I love that name. So I want to welcome my beautiful guest. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Maureen. So great to be here with you. Really happy to be here.
So here on I Never Knew, we always talk first about the struggle, the knee story, as we say, the moment that really brought us to our knees, that gave us these inspirations or these ideas, or the reason why we write the books, we do the podcast, we do the speeches, or we aspire to help others and pay it forward. So tell us about the moment where you said, well, I didn't really think about writing the book, but then I felt I needed to write the book.
Yeah, it's a great point of reflection. So, I actually got divorced when my daughter was 7. And I need to start by saying I'm not an advocate for divorce. I think couples should get married and stay married for the long term if they can. Excuse me. But sometimes things don't turn out as planned. And so in my instance, I have parents that have been married 55 years this year, Maureen. And so I always thought that was the path I was heading down. So when we did decide to get divorced, and over the years since my divorce, I'd been asked by a number of my girlfriends who have children to help them think through the details of the divorce. And so I reflect that the girl who never ever thought she would get a divorce has become a poster child for a good divorce. And so, after helping my friends through this challenging time in life, they really encouraged me to write down the guidance I was providing them. But I had never actually intended to write a book. As you mentioned, I don't consider myself a writer. I'm a bullet point business writer. And I was in Mexico City at a business dinner with colleagues. And a colleague of mine turned to me and he said, "Sarah, you're so happy." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm really happy." He said, "But you're divorced." And I said, "Solomon, getting a divorce is not a death sentence." I said, "My ex-husband and I decided to no longer be married to each other. I'm happy. Grace is happy. My ex-husband's happy." I said, "It is possible to be divorced and happy." And I mentioned to him that my friends had been encouraging me to write all my guidance down. He goes, "You really need to do that." So the next morning I got him on my flight out of Mexico City. And I opened my personal laptop and I wrote the first line that said, "This book has been written by a girl who never ever thought she would get a divorce, who got a divorce, and what she learned along the way." And then I wrote about 90% of the book on Delta, traveling the world, because I traveled internationally for my role. And so I do joke that instead of reading a book on my flights, I'd finish my work and I'd not watch a movie or read a book. I'd start writing my book. So, and I think it's the reason this book is so important, and actually I think the message I'm trying to get out in the world is so important, is there's just not enough conversation about the topic of a good divorce and how to have a good divorce. And, at the end of the day, the societal perception that a good divorce is an attainable outcome is what I'm hoping we can start to change. And I think we are changing, but it takes one divorce at a time to do that, and people approaching it with a different mindset.
Yeah. It's been an oxymoron, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have people that are very skeptical, when they hear the term good divorce. They look at me like, good divorce, really? And, and I say, if you as a couple have decided that you no longer should be together, and there are reasons, right, that probably has happened. I do say that no one gets married to get divorced, right?
Yeah. Right.
And no one generally gets divorced for positive reasons. There's usually some type of trigger that's caused that decision. But the children that are part of that family, when those parents decide to do that, they're the ones most significantly impacted by the decision to get a divorce. And so for me, a good divorce is when a couple puts aside their feelings for one another and really focuses on what's best for their children. And when couples go through a divorce and children involved, the stakes are high. They're so high. And we owe it to our children to ensure they're not collateral damage, through the divorce, both, during and after. And so I say, even though we decide not to be in the same house together, we've made a commitment to our children to raise them in the healthiest and happiest environment possible. I joke that we cover the plugs, we put bike helmets on them, we feed them organic milk, we do all these things, to keep them healthy and happy. But then the toxicity that can come from a divorce can have long-term impact on the children's approach to relationships, their approach to marriage, or their views on marriage, and even their overall happiness in life. So I just really think we have to take the co-parenting responsibility that comes with being a parent, even in a divorce situation, very seriously.
Oh my goodness. I can vouch for all of that. As a life coach and dealing with clients who come to me and say all of these things that happened through my parents' divorce and what I experienced and witnessed, and B, going through 2 divorces myself, one with kids, one without kids, and C, being married to a man who had a very healthy divorce and co-parenting situation. So I've seen it all. And I'll predecess this. Not all here's a really important thing. It's when I read your book, I loved the maturity that you both had. You both decided we're going to put our feelings aside and we're going to do what is best for our child. Here's the problem. When it comes to divorce, love turns to hate very quickly, and we use our children as pawns to get back at the other parent. And it's very difficult. I would have loved to have a nice, calm, good divorce and a very mutual co-parenting situation. And I tried. And it was something you addressed in your book, that it can be difficult. And what you said was, if it can't be amiable, then the lawyers get involved. And I love that you did give the advice is, if you can't do it as well as you guys did it, then you will. And you gave that advice of, then you have to address the parenting and the visitation. So how do you, it's very difficult when you don't have the maturity level evenly distributed. Or I'm going to say this, if one isn't ready to let go and one is. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, first of all, I think you can, as an individual, you can only control what you can control.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes all you can control is you. And that's quite honestly what you need to focus on, even when you're going through a divorce. And so I generally say that, if you don't have a willing individual on the other side of that process, what are the things that you can do? What are the mindsets that you can embrace? What are the actions that you can take that can still put your children first and still try to do the best thing for them every step of the way? And that, I think, is what you can control. You can't control how that other person's going to react. You can't control what they're going to say or do. But one of the things I talk about in my book is building a compartmentalization muscle. Sorry, frog this one.
I know, me too. Me too.
I know we've got frogs, but building a compartmentalization muscle.
Mhm.
And the reason that's so important is it is a high emotion time, and you're in an emotional roller coaster during your divorce. And so there are going to be moments when those buttons of yours might be pushed by your ex-spouse or soon to be ex-spouse. And you have to decide how you react in that moment. And if your children are around, if they're in earshot, the question is that the right time to react? Because the way you react sticks with them, they remember it, it influences ways they think about the other parent, the way they, quite honestly, they probably reflect on you. So, you know, and it's not that those emotions shouldn't come out. And I generally say, you know, go for a long walk, go outside, you know, do what you need to do to either diffuse the situation or go show the emotions somewhere else. But it's not healthy also to just put them inside and let them stay there. That's also not a healthy approach. But the compartmentalization allows you to decide when are you going to have those emotions come out and who's around when they do. Go to a therapist, call a girlfriend, call a family member, or just, you know, go have a long conversation with yourself. You know, which whatever it takes, but we owe it to our kids that they're not the ones seeing that.
Yeah.
It just, that's not healthy for them. You know, it just is not healthy for them. And it's interesting that the term good divorce, actually, my Grace was the one that coined that for me. And we were at a CVS checking out at the pharmacy, and there was a People magazine on the newsstand, and there was a celebrity couple, and it was a couple getting a divorce. And she says, "Mommy, is that a good divorce or a bad divorce?" And I said, "Grace, I don't know. What's the difference between a good divorce and a bad divorce?" She goes, "Well, a good divorce is when the mommy and daddy are nice to each other, like you and daddy. And a bad divorce is when they scream and yell at each other." And honestly, Maureen, this is a year after we got divorced. So she's 8. And I said, "You know what, Grace, it's hard to tell from a magazine cover what type of divorce that is." And we walked out. I thought, you know, whatever my ex-husband and I were doing, the fact that our 8-year-old could say that we have a good divorce, we were onto something. And I wanted us to keep doing what we were doing. And so that was really kind of, for me, just a signal of, you know, the intent we had gone into this to put her front and center, to make sure she was, you know, the focus was working.
Oh, I didn't think that's so beautiful. And yeah, you're right. You know, tip number 1, stay in your circle of control. You can only control what you're saying, what you're doing. In my case, there was a lot of negativity on that side, and you know, things were being said negative about me. And what I learned later is, because in parenting class, they say your children are half you and half them. And if you are saying bad things about that other partner, then you're saying bad things about half of your child. And that stuck with me from parenting class. If I took nothing away, I took that. And my children, who are now grown adults, 33, 31, and 24, have said, "I don't remember you saying anything bad about dad." And yet in the end, they saw for themselves, you know, even though he was negative about me, they saw it for themselves. And I remember just thinking, it'll all come out in the wash. They'll see everything for themselves. It's not for me to point out. So I love that, the compartmentalization. And I'm going to correct you. Don't go to a therapist, go to a life coach. Just kidding.
Well, honestly, absolutely. There's, you know what, it's an important thing. There's so many amazing people out there that can help you from different angles, right?
I kid so much, but I work so much as a relationship coach, doing the post-divorce, because we lose so much self-confidence and the identity of going from being a couple to being on our own, and myself only being a couple for so long my adult life, and then being single. Like, I didn't know who I was all of a sudden when I wasn't a wife and a mom. You know,
Yes.
it was like those first, being on my own when kids went for visitation, I was like, "Oh my God, who am I? Like, who am I? I'm not mom and wife." It was a culture shock, like going out for the first time by myself. And it was really finding myself. So helping people through that and helping them find purpose in loving themselves, and you know, going out and doing something that they can do to contribute to the world that gives them value and self-love, again, is so valuable. You lose that when you're going through that divorce, especially as women, because we're givers. We're such givers. And then we lose giving as a wife and giving as a mom. And then it's all on your shoulders to be this single mom. And my son was 10 months old and my girls were 6 and 8. And woof, that was a lot. So some of the things you brought up in your book, which again, my first divorce, I had children. My second divorce was amiable. It was great. It was like pretty easy. We both went down, filled out paperwork, no lawyers, still friends to this day. It was easy. It was a good divorce. But the first one was very difficult, involving support and all that. So this was interesting. These are the things that stuck out for me. The messaging for friends was the first thing that came up. Like, how do you share it without saying, well, he was a big fat jerk? Mine was, I had domestic violence and I also had infidelity. So how do you not share the reasons why they did what they did, right?
Well, and I think here's the thing. I think it in certain instances it may be important to share because you're putting protections up around you, to make sure you're safe. So that's understandable. There's other times when it's best not to share, because whatever you share, your children also take in. And they just may not be at an age to really process and understand what that was and what that means. And so they might find out down the road, or they might, you tell them different things, you tell them things that are age appropriate.
Yes.
But I think having your friends, your family, colleagues, whoever you decide to share, just being consistent in what that message is, because whatever you share will eventually come back to your children, and you want to be okay with whatever that is.
And they know more than you think they know,
Oh my goodness. And they notice, Maureen, they notice. I mean, everything. And I think that's one of the things that I can't underscore enough. I mean, when you talk about the physical environment, right, that they're in, and I tell a story in my book about, we had a long hallway of black and white photos of both of our families, and I needed to give my ex-husband his photos. And so I took the time to take the black and white photos of his off the wall, put new photos up of Grace and I and more of my family. And I sent her down for a play date. She's age 7. She goes down the street for a play date with a friend. And she comes back a couple hours later, and I'm in the kitchen. I hear this little voice out of the hallway. Hey, Mom. I said, what's that, Grace? She says, the wall has changed. And I stopped in my tracks. I was like, and I said, well, what's changed? She said, there are more pictures of me up there. It looks great. And she ran up the stairs to her room. And I just took this deep breath. Now, the thing is, Maureen, if I hadn't gone through the effort of reframing photos, and all I had done is taken the photos of my ex-husband off the wall and given them to him in a box and left those little hangers, interspersed throughout the hallway, what Grace would be telling a therapist years from now is my parents got divorced and my mom took all the pictures of my dad off the wall and left those little hangers.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so amazing, the subtle things, and then the guilt sometimes too. And I want to say this to all the women and men out there, single dads too, don't beat yourself up, because you're doing the best you can. And I still carry guilt. Like, did I do it soon enough? And especially if you're in an abusive situation. So my girls to this day, have said, I remember, and this is crazy. I tried doing everything the right way, and I went in and I told them, mommy and daddy are going to get divorced. And I love that you said age appropriate. So I was very careful about not disclosing too much, but of course they see violence in the household. They hear dad doing things to mom, yelling. And I remember the profound moment of them watching an incident that happened. And I remember my thought was, I can't allow them to think that's normal. And that was when I made my mind up to say, they're going to choose a man just like that. And they were 6 and 8. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And I decided I got to get him out of this. Was it too late at 6 and 8? So I had gone in, sat down and said, hey, you know what? Mommy and dad are going to get divorced. I did have a counselor come visit the house, talk to them. What
Yeah.
I didn't know that they told me later was after I left the room, they were doing a happy dance. Wow. Right? So now I carry this guilt. I'm like, I didn't do it soon enough. They were like jumping for joy. I mean, how does that happen? I should have done. Don't beat yourself up. It is what it is. I did it when I was supposed to do it. I thought I was going to stay in it. My parents married 58 years. No one divorced in my family. So thank you. It's just,
Uh,
we do what we do best at the time, what we think is best. It's hard to navigate. It's the first time we do it, or maybe even the third or fourth. We don't know. It's different.
Right. It's different. Maureen, the thing, absolutely. And the thing is, first of all, I always say we're doing the best we can, right? As parents in every aspect of life, we're doing the best we can. The other thing is, again, you don't grow up planning to get divorced. So to know that it's the right or wrong thing at the right or wrong time, it is really hard to know, and that's the only thing I say to people when they ask me about this part of the kind of thought process is, I always just wanted to be able to say to Grace, I've done all I can to stay in this marriage, right?
Yeah.
And her dad did too. Like, we did all we could. It didn't work, But then the thing is, if that's the decision, you make that decision. And I generally say divorce is an action. You get divorced. That action, that decision should not mean that the rest of your life has to live under a negative cloud.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Right?
I've always said I think it takes so much more strength to get out of something that you're miserable in than to just stay in its status quo and be miserable. And you're doing a disservice to your children. If you stay in something, you're
Yeah.
teaching them it's okay to be miserable. You have to tolerate things that make you unhappy.
Yeah.
And that's just how life is. Suck it up, be
Yeah.
miserable, and do something that makes you unhappy. And I think it takes strength to do something that is so uncertain. You don't know what the future looks like, but you're brave enough to say, I'm doing it anyway because I want myself and my children to be happy, even though I don't know what it looks like on that scary side of the mountain.
Absolutely. And it does. It takes courage. It takes focus. By the way, it takes effort. I mean, it is easier to not, right? To just not take the action, to not make that change, to not go through all that is entailed. But I will say, if you do think it's what you need to do, and again, I always say I'm not an advocate for divorce, but if you do have to, there is a way to do it. There is a way to take those steps down the path that you're going to need to go down. And it's a lot of baby steps. It's a lot of individual steps. It's a lot of decisions you have to make and discussions you have to have. And so that's really one of the things that I realized in going through the process is just how much you have to think about, especially when children are involved, about the short term, and then as you look out into how you want their lives to be managed over the long term. And that's where a lot of the co-parenting and the thought process, you really have to get focused on what those things are.
Well, I think the legal system has shifted to where they are embracing more single dads and they are embracing more 50-50. I had full custody of my children because there was domestic violence. They don't give 50-50 custody. But this was interesting to me how you broke out scheduling. And I had never heard of this, of course, because it wasn't something for me a factor. So explain to me the 5-2-2-5, the week on, week off, and the nesting and flexible schedules. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, well, there's just so many different ways these days to structure how your kids' lives are. And so there is full custody where one parent has, the children full time. There's 50-50. And then the 5-2-2-5 is where one parent has the children for 5 days, then they're off for 2, and then the other parent gets them for 5, off for 2. So it leaves a little bit more time for you to have with your children without it being a whole week.
Yeah.
And basically you're alternating weekends, and then someone kind of gets a portion of the week. And so it ends up working that's what we used, in fairness, and it worked very well for us. The alternate week is where you literally do full weeks, like a Sunday to a Sunday. And so but then depending on the age of children, that's a long time to maybe not see your children. And especially when they're little, I think as they get older, they could probably get more used to that schedule. And then nesting is when the parents actually switch places. So there is a family home, and then the parents come and go. And I have had some friends who have done that for a period of time. I think personally, I think that's a hard thing to do for a long period of time. But I think in the transition year, or maybe 2 years post-divorce, as you're trying to make the transition as seamless for your children as possible, that is a potential option to consider. Maybe not one I personally recommend, but it is out there as an option. And so it's just knowing that there's different ways to structure this. The thing is, whatever approach you take, Maureen, one of the most poignant moments for us, or for me specifically, on our divorce journey is the very first time we were going to have Grace see a child specialist once we told her. And my ex-husband and I went in to meet with him before we were going to tell her. And so we sat down and he looks at me, he goes, "Sarah, do you travel?" And I said, "Yeah, I travel for my job internationally." And he looked at my ex-husband, he said, "Do you travel?" And he said, "Yeah, I travel domestically." He said, "Well, Grace is about to become a professional traveler. She's going to travel every week for the next 11 years until she heads off to college." And I burst into tears. And he said, "She's going to pack a bag every week." And so I walked out of there and I said to my ex-husband, "I don't know what this looks like yet, but I want to minimize Grace ever feeling like she's a professional traveler, because I know what it feels like to travel a lot. You know what it feels like. And as an 7, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, up until age 18, to travel every week and to pack a bag every week." So what we did, and I do appreciate, Maureen, that there's socioeconomic considerations with what I'm going to say, but we tried to have the basics of both homes, right? The socks, the underwear, the jeans, in fairness, 2 pairs of running shoes, not the big things, not the big sporting equipment or whatever, you'd only have one of. But we did that because I didn't want Grace to be the kid at school that every week she had that extra bag because she was going to mom or dad's house and she literally was carrying an extra bag every week. I said, I don't want her to be that kid. And so we did do this kind of approach. And what's funny, I do joke that somehow all the socks ended up at one house. I have no idea how. I still like, how the hell ended up? So we would have rebalancing days. But those rebalancing moments weren't for Grace to go into her dresser and figure out what was out of balance. It was for my ex-husband and I too. So I would just text him, say, "Hey, I don't have enough of this. Can you look?" And he'd go. And then when he dropped her off, he would hand me the bag with the extra stuff that I then would go up and put in her dresser. Because again, why does Grace have to resort her things every week or every couple of weeks?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you are correct. There is a socioeconomic thing. I remember having to provide diapers and food every time my children went to their father's house every other weekend. So not only, and getting no child support, I would have to provide at my house, as well as providing when they went for only 2 days at their father's house. And my kids would come home and say, "Dad had rotten food in his fridge." So very difficult when you
so difficult.
There needs to be like some kind of assistance, for those moms that don't have, those contributing parents, and without getting CPS involved, because single moms who are struggling do have a difficult time wanting to reach out for help, because you do always fear that someone's going to say you're not providing well for your kids, or there was always that thing hanging over my head that someone's going to say I'm not doing well. And I worked night shift in an ER trauma center, and I couldn't have a babysitter because I couldn't afford childcare, so I slept with one eye open, and it was a real struggle. So but I do love and appreciate the camaraderie. And my husband now and his ex-wife, man, they had a good divorce, and they did the same thing. He was a single dad for a while she was traveling, and then she had it. Just, oh my gosh, even to this day, I mean, we've gone and we've all shared an Airbnb for his college graduation together, the 4 of us. And it's just, and I tell them how much I respect and appreciate how they co-parented, because when you don't have that, you look at it and go, oh, I wish.
Yeah.
If only. So I can so appreciate everything that you're saying. And sometimes it just it isn't feasible. And if you can
I
just
do appreciate that.
if you just try so hard and just try the best you can, and just like you said, stay in what you can control and do your best to get them to be on board. So this I love. This is something I deal with often with people that are going through a divorce when I'm coaching, is they get very frustrated because the messages go back and forth, the negativity. And I always say, cut the contact if it is not pertaining to your child. And I always say, you know what? Block each other on text and only have emails. If it has to go through lawyers, keep it through lawyers, because it can get very toxic. And all it takes is one tiny little thing to get that cycle of toxicity rolling. So what was your suggestion for messages between parents?
Yes, yeah, I think it's a really important point. So first of all, your children should not be the one, they're not meant to be the messenger.
Nope.
Not meant to be the one that carries checks to the other parent or, some type of payment. They're not a mailman, they're the messenger, they're your children.
Yeah.
And so I think deciding up front in your own mind, and it may even be something you discuss with your ex-spouse, how you're going to communicate with each other, how often you think you're going to, I think the gift of texting and email is wonderful. Thankfully, we have it these days. But, I generally kept a list of the things that I needed to talk to my ex-husband about, and then would ping him and say, hey, can we touch base for 15 minutes? I just have these things to run through. Now, if they're timely, obviously, you need to talk or you need to jump on a quick call. But if they aren't, there's no reason to be interacting every day with each other unless you have to. You decided to no longer be married to each other. And so what's the interaction that works for both of you as you're co-parenting your child? And you just have to think about what are the structures you want to put in place in that, how flexible it is, or how, to your point, it doesn't need to be really structured for certain reasons. And then also it can change over time. It's not like whatever you agree to initially is how you'll be for the whole course of your post-divorce life with that ex-spouse. But I do think it's important to kind of be conscious about how you're choosing to communicate, both in terms of the messages and also the means in terms of the actual ways you are.
Very true. Very true. And I like something that you brought up, which was key situations. When things happen, when things come up. I happen to have had a very disengaged co-parent. So, I would be one of these, like, I want to know, are they sick? Are they not feeling well? Do they feel hot? Do they have a fear? I was sort of a helicopter mom. I was the one who took them to doctor's appointments, and I had a child with ADHD, so I monitored the medication. I was the helicopter parent and the homework mom, and I was the end all be all. The other parent was like, meh, whatever. So they'd come home from their weekends and things had happened and I didn't know about it. They wouldn't even give them their ADHD medication and they'd be bouncing off the wall. And it was just maddening to not have the information. I'd give them the information and they'd be like, okay. So I love that you address key situations, like have this agreement. I need to know this, or if something happened at school, if they got in trouble or suspended or whatever.
Absolutely. It's so important. And the other thing is, what are those key moments when you're both meant to be there?
Yes.
And think about that, because I do think this is, and again, a moment we had that just stuck with me is when Grace was in 6th grade, we went to her parent-teacher conference. And at that stage, the student goes with the parents. And so my ex-husband, Grace, and I all go in and sit down with their teacher for an hour. And at the end of the conference, the teacher looks at us, she goes, wait a minute, are you two divorced? And I said, yeah, we've been divorced for 5 years since Grace was in 1st grade. She said, I had no idea. And I said, well, it didn't occur to me to come in and tell you we're here for her parent-teacher conference this 6th grade. I said, it's not like we're going to come and say, hi, we're divorced. Can we now have Grace's parent-teacher conference? So, and what she said, and it was really interesting, she goes, you know what? There are so few parents that can come into this office and sit for 1 hour and talk about their children's education. She said, it is very, very rare. She goes, and it really makes me sad. And by the way, Grace is hearing the whole discussion. And I said, it makes me really sad, because what's more important to two parents than how their child is doing in school?
I know. Oh, bless you guys. Because I would bet if my ex had come in with us at a parent teacher, they would probably say we didn't even know she had a father, because it's,
Well,
and
it
that's so common, these,
is,
absentee parents. And
it
I
is.
wanted what you had, and you can't make that person do that. And the fact that you were able to just do that, and I'm certain that my husband and his ex-wife were there for everything, and they were exactly what you guys were. And it's so great to get the word out that it can be that way. We can
Yeah.
rise above what the relationship can be over, but the parenting never stops.
Yeah.
You've got marriages, you've got graduations, you've got grandchildren. It can all just be this really beautiful, we can still be friends and get along. We
Yeah.
don't have to be a relationship to like one another.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not in fairness, the spectrum of friendship in a post-divorce scenario can be from literally interacting about your children. And I would say, not asking each other about how you're doing or how their families do. Like, it's just the children to friendships. And I've seen the range and I've seen the spectrum of that. My ex-husband actually took Grace to college and helped her move into her freshman year dorm room, together. That was something we both wanted to do. I said, let's do it. Let's. And so, but I think those are moments that Grace deserves. If that's what she wants, is that both of us to be there with her, she deserves that. Right. And again,
Yeah.
because we got divorced when she was 7, why at age 18 does there have to do this? You have to choose which parent moves you into your dorm room.
Right, right. And on a side note, make sure that when you get into other relationships, make sure that those new spouses understand the relationship that you have too. Like, I have absolute zero problem with my husband calling his ex, like
Yeah,
zero. Like, please
it's a great
do.
point. No,
His
it's a great point.
anything pertaining to his son, they could text, they could call, they could meet up, they could, his son was recently in the hospital, and they text and they call. I have absolutely zero problem. Like, it's healthy. I didn't have that. I would have loved to have that. So for me, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yes, please do. And I think it's a beautiful thing. So make sure that you have new partners that get that, because you don't want a spouse that's like, why do you have such a good relationship with your ex? Well, you should, right?
Absolutely. It's a great point, Maureen. Yeah, it's a really great point. And I hadn't thought about that in terms of like exploring that in that next relationship in that way, but absolutely.
Yeah. This was a really cool point in your book that I again hadn't even thought of. Um, Entering each other's homes.
Yes.
What? And I've had clients bring that up, where people just walk in because they lived in that home together. And boundaries, hello, boundaries is a big deal. Just because you live there, you no longer live there. And it makes people uncomfortable. Boom, that's a great point that you put in there.
No, you just have to think about what are the rules of the road in this post-divorce phase. I mean, you can say, especially if the children are little, you might want them to be able to come in and like help the kids into the house, and but what does that look like? Are you aware that they're driving up and they're about to enter the house, or what are the agreements on the ins and outs of that? And so I do think that that's something. These are all, again, those you forget the logistics of life, of like living life, especially across 2 households, until you get into it. And then you say, okay, how is this really going to work? I mean, actually, I just literally had someone tell me the other day, I had a cupboard in my back hall with things that needed to go to my ex-husband's house for Grace. And I would just have it, it's a shelf and it was a cupboard. And that was his, like, kind of his shelf. So he knew that if he came in with Grace, he would open the cupboard and look at the shelf and see if there's anything there. Because I didn't really want to have to remember, oh yeah, go get that thing, or, there's something there for you. Or if there was, artwork that had come home, I'm like, here, you can take it, whatever it was. I just wanted it to be, I'd stick it on the shelf and he just know to go look at it. So it's just, again, these are small things, but otherwise you have to remember, like, hey, let me give you this and let me give you that. And so how do you minimize the interactions that may not be necessary, or something you really don't want to have to worry about, but you also, in fairness to your child, there's things that need to go back and forth, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, yeah. And surprisingly, as I think back to mine, there was like a really good respect. He would always stand out by the car. And the kids could come out to him, or, they'd run out to him and hug him. And we had like an entryway, and I would have a chair, and I would have their stuff on the chair. And, if he did come, he would just stand right in the entryway. So he was very respectful of that. But it's something to think about, but it's like,
Right.
I mean, it wasn't the home that we had together, but he still was respectful of that. And I don't think I ever had to remind him. So that was interesting. Traveling to other countries. And I know you do international travel. And when you brought up the letter at Canada, I was like, wait, what?
No, I had a really interesting moment. And, this is one where, again, I've traveled the world. I've been over 55 countries. So I've kind of done that international travel, but I took Grace on a trip, and we flew from Seattle to Vancouver, and we landed in Vancouver, and the customs agent said, and by the way, I had the whole conversation with Grace. She was 12, and said, well, where's your father? And she said, well, he's not with us. He's not traveling with us. My parents are divorced. And the custom agent looked at me and said, well, where's the letter that allows you to bring your child into Canada? And I said, letter? He said, you're required to have a letter that says that the other parent is comfortable with you bringing your child over country lines. And I literally was standing, and by the way, they weren't going to let us in. It was like, I did not have this letter. And I said, sir, we can call him if we need to, but, I don't have a letter. I didn't know a letter was required. And so it was a moment for me of realizing that, there are situations, in fairness, where parents might look to take their child over a country line, and you've heard those crazy stories that can happen around the world in these instances. It had not occurred to me in any way, shape, or form. And so it just was a moment that I thought, you have to think about some of those, again, dynamics of both society, quite honestly, of laws that you may not be aware of. And that was a moment. So then moving forward, I always had a letter with me, whether we were going to the Caribbean or Mexico or Canada, wherever we were going, so that didn't happen. Because it really, they literally we were almost having to get back in a plane to Seattle, but I said, you can call him. So they did let us go in, but it was a moment. It was definitely in a realization I had not had of that requirement.
And I recall filling out, my son was a minor. I recall filling out a passport application, and it said something about that, about if you're divorced, that both parents need to be there when you go to turn in the application, right?
Yes, and we did that. So when we got Grace's passport when she was young, we were there together. Actually, we had to renew it because we'd gotten one when she was really young, and they only last 5 years when they're kids. So at 7 or 8, but probably around age 8, we had to go renew, and we had to stand in line together to go get the passport. And so it was it's a very real thing. And so, and I appreciate why. I appreciate why the laws are that way. But I think, again, these are these things that unless you really have them in view, they can be a moment where you're either not going into a country you're intending to travel to, or you need to, make sure things are tied up the way they need to be.
Yeah. Those are all the things that stood out for me now that she is an adult. Yes. How do you think it either benefited her, or are there things that she's ever brought up to you now that she either she says, obviously she's grateful, because it sounds like since age 8, she's like, wow, this is so unique. Obviously comparing yourself, and my story is more common than your story. What does she think of all of it, and going forward, marriage and kids and all that?
So it's interesting. So one thing I'd say is Grace was amazing throughout her divorce and never complained about going back and forth between 2 homes and all of those things. One thing that was, as she was growing up, she was the first of her friend group to have parents who were divorced. So as other friends around her went through this, she watched some other dynamics of her friends' parents and how they were handling it. And she goes, Mom, it doesn't have to be that hard. It doesn't have to be that way. And I said, well, Grace, different couples handle things differently than how your dad and I did. And so she really helped her tried to help her friends during those times, just being a sounding board and helping them in their own journey with their families. But the one moment that really stuck out to me is 2 years ago. She's a rising junior this year in college, but 2 years ago, as she was packing up for school, she came home from her dad's one night and she said, "Mom, I'm calling this the Great Consolidation." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" She said, this fall, when I head off to school, it'll be the first time in 11 years where all my stuff is in one place.
Oh, wow. Wow. Right.
And I said, and she goes, and I'm really excited about that. And I said, "Grace," I go, "I am so excited that you're going to finally have all of your stuff in one place." And I said, "And I just want to thank you because you have never once in 11 years complained to mom or dad that you didn't have all your stuff in one place."
Did you have a twinge of mommy guilt just a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
I know.
I mean, deep. That was just that moment of like, and again, I know we did all we could. I said, we did the best we can, Maureen, right? We did the best we can. But even with that, knowing that that was a moment for her of realizing the life she had to lead because of our choice, because of our decision. And she did the best she could, and she was amazing throughout the whole thing. But I realized at that moment that it wasn't lost on her.
Right. What do you think it taught her about relationships and marriage? Has she voiced anything?
Yeah, I think I think two things. I think she totally believes in relationships. I think this next generation of children have an interesting view on marriage in general. But I think, no, I think she believes in marriage as well. But I think that I'm fascinated by kind of what's happening with the perspective of marriage with these younger generations, and just like the timing of it, the expectation of it, how it unfolds. But no, she I think has a healthy view. I mean, she's a communicator. She shares how she's thinking about things, and I think that we've had lots of long talks about there's lots of different ways to structure your life.
Yeah. Well,
and
I think what we've done well is that we have not placed expectations on them, and I think our generation had a lot of expectations on marriage.
And that's the thing. And I've said, however you choose to structure your life, right? I will support that. If you want to get married, my only thing is don't get married too young. That was that I said, I'd like you to take some time. And, I think you figure out who you are. And as you do that, you find someone who's going to meet you at the point where you are. And so I think that was my only kind of bit of advice on the marriage front. But at this point, we just talk about the fact that there's lots of ways to structure life. There's lots of ways to think about who you want to spend your time with, how you want to spend your time, where you want to live, like just, the whole discussion on life. Speaking to a life coach, all of those things. But I think having a conscious decision or discussion about at young ages with your kids is also important.
Yeah.
And because of a divorce, sometimes you might have those conversations earlier than you'd intend to.
Very, very true.
So there's those moments where you're like, I hate to say it, but this is a time of reflection that maybe we wouldn't have had if your dad and I'd stayed together, but we didn't. So we've had some of those talks over, actually a lot of times on our vacation, we'd sit and have a long dinner where we just talk about things and, how life had unfolded. But, I think at the end of the day, I go back to, we're all happy post-divorce. And, divorce can be such a scarlet letter in society in terms of like, you're divorced or your children of divorce. And yes, it is not a positive thing to go through. I don't think anyone's saying, "Oh, this was so fun." But I do think that if you approach it in a way, you and your children can come out of it. And it takes time, but can come out of it and live healthy and happy lives, have healthy relationships. And so I think that's really what, the intent of my book was meant to do, is just show people that that's possible. And then things to think about to try to get to a state where you can say you've had a good divorce.
I agree. I think you're a shining example, and listeners, she did such a fantastic job. It's so beautifully written. It's so easy to read, and it's really a journal. I mean, she leaves places where there's white space for you to write in there, have I done this, or write some notes of what you think about it. I just, for me, we were talking off air. I mean, I'm ADD, so I like a short little, Cliff Notes version. And
Yes.
for me, having gone through 2 divorces, to still get things out of this, it's fantastic. I just think it's such a helpful guide, and I will definitely use it in my coaching practice for any of my clients that are going through a divorce. I think it's just, you did a fantastic job, and I am so grateful for
Oh,
you
thank
being
you.
on this podcast. Where can people find your book or reach out to you to connect with you if they are going through something and they want some advice?
Thanks. Yeah. So a couple of things, and just a quick note on the book. It has 100. It's written in bite-sized pieces. To your point, there's 185 topics, and they're written out in terms of preparing for the change, during the change, and post the change. And there's just a topic per page, as you said. So I do think it really helps to just, maybe you only want to pick up and read 1 or 2 topics before you go on and reflect on those and then come back to it. So it's not meant to be read cover to cover for someone who's going through divorce, because it's almost maybe too much to take in all at once. It's like, pick it up when you need it. And to that end, I'll tell one quick story when I was just launching the book, I had a woman stop me in the produce section of a grocery store, and she goes, "Are you Sarah Armstrong, the author?" And I said, yeah, actually I am. And she said, "Well, I was at your book signing at Barnes and Noble, and I'm going through divorce." And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." She goes, "Well, I want to thank you for writing this book, because I carry it around with me and it keeps me calm."
Oh, there it is. There it is. It's the starfish story. It mattered to that one. And oh my goodness, that's why we do what we do, right?
And I said, "Thank you for sharing that with me." And she walked away, Maureen, and I stood in the middle of the produce section. And I thought, that's why I've written this book, to help a woman that I've never met before, who's going through one of the more challenging times that she's had in life, and helping to keep her calm. So to that end, the book is available in 3. It's available as a paperback. It's available in an ebook, iBook, Kindle, and also as an audiobook. I went into the studio and did an Audible version. And so, so you can find it on Amazon, find it at Barnes and Noble, but also at www.gooddivorce.guide is my website, and you can contact me through the email that's there. I'm also available on LinkedIn and other places. But I just hope that all of your listeners know that it is a really challenging time in life, but if you can take some bits of guidance from this book, and hopefully it helps you to stay calm and get through the process in the best way you can, and hopefully you can have a good divorce at the end of it.
Absolutely. And I'll put those links in your episode notes so everyone can have those, so they can reach out and get that book, and just reach out and give you a shout out and give you some good reviews and let you know how you're changing their world. So I'm just so grateful for you. I'm grateful for what you're doing, and I appreciate you being our guest today on I Never Knew But My Dog Did. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Maureen. Truly appreciate it.
So listeners, I hope you really enjoyed that. And I hope for anyone who's going through a trying time, divorce is never easy, as she said. I've been through it. She's been through it. But I can tell you that the other side of it, even though it feels sometimes like you're never going to get through it, we promise you that you will. And if you need help going through it, read the book. And then if you need help with the emotional side of it, I'm also here for you. And I'm at lifecoachmaureen.com. And also my book, My Dog is My Relationship Coach, and My Dog is More Enlightened Than I Am, helps you to find yourself and make sure that you value yourself and your self-worth and your self-confidence and your self-esteem, so that you make sure that you're grounded in your self-love and you don't lose that, because in divorce we tend to lose that and really start to feel bad about ourselves and our identity about who we are. So I don't want you to lose that. We're going to build you up and make sure that you're strong in who you are and create those habits and those goals for you. So I thank you all for being here. Don't forget to go get your fun things for your dogs and now your cats at mydogiseverything.net. Healthy treats, apparel, safety items, because we love our pets. So take care of yourself, take care of each other. Most of all, take care of those furry babies, and please adopt, don't shop. I'll see you all next week. Until then, bye.